session 2, we're going to introduce Conor Smith, who is one of the project officers for An Eye to the Future. And research shows that the number of OHS incidents in employees with a disability is significantly lower than the average employee. And we're going to hear some real life stories of how people who are blind or vision impaired have managed to make their workplace safer. So over to you, Conor, to talk to us about navigating the workplace.
No problem. Thanks, Maddie. I'll just say as well for everybody, I am using a screen reader that Renee was talking about. So if you do hear me pause, it's because I'm listening to my next bullet point. And also, sorry about the sunnies, but I don't want to be staring off into the wilderness and not knowing what I'm looking at. So yeah, just giving you a heads up. So as Maddie said, I suppose there is a perception out there that somebody in a workplace with a disability, especially somebody who might be blind or vision impaired, it's maybe people think it's an accident waiting to happen. And there's been studies done in Australia, studies done around the world that actually have disproven this. I've actually worked myself in a almost totally blind office environment, and I can't say that the rates of incident were any higher than any other office place. But it's just, I guess, one of those things that people tend to think, well, how does a person navigate in that space? And if you don't particularly know how, then I suppose it can be the natural human thing to do is to kind of think, well, it must be just an accident waiting to happen. So I thought I'd kind of talk about myself, considering that I am almost totally blind, in how I go about, I guess, the different steps of the job application process, but also just working in general. So I'll start with the interview stage, because that's where navigating becomes more of an issue. So for the interview stage, if it's not done online and it has to be done in person, what I would tend to do is, in most cases, I'm not going to know where I need to go. I'm not going to have training to get to an office because if I did that for every single job I applied for, then I'd be learning far more of Sydney than I really need to know based on what might actually work. So what I often would do in that situation is I'd get either somebody to drop me off out the front, or I'd get a taxi, and I have a guide dog so she can find me to the front door. She knows what a door is, which is pretty handy. And then I would just go in, speak to the receptionists, and go in and find my way. And for that first meeting, my preference is more, it's about getting there. It's about getting there and having the interview. I can work out the mobility after the fact, and I would do that by getting in touch with the Guide Dogs Association or Vision Australia. And I would just organize that between myself and them. So it doesn't have to be anything to do with the employers. There's no cost to it. I can take care of all that by myself. And that's how I would go about it. And they would come out and teach me to go from my local train station, if I needed to learn it, all the way in. And I actually have an anecdote where I live out in Western Sydney, and I used to work in Strathfield. So it's about a 40-kilometre or so train ride. And this guy at the station wanted to help me, and he just couldn't understand that I didn't need assistance, even though I told him I was going to work. And I basically just had to turn to him and say, look, mate, I didn't walk out of the door 40 Ks away and just hope to get to work. Like I had it figured out. Like it took time and training, but I got there. But I suppose if you don't know any better, then you might think otherwise. So I respected him for his offer, but it just wasn't particularly necessary. So that's what I would do for the interview. When I get the job, like I said, I would use Guide Dogs or Vision Australia or other mobility orientation and mobility services to learn. And they can also come into the office space to show me, okay, what's the best way to navigate? Where's the lift buttons? What the lift buttons do? The layout of the floor plan so that I can get around on my own with a cane. Because generally in an office space, most people are blind or vision impaired. If they need to use a cane or a dog, they would probably use the cane because it's just easier than getting the dog up just to grab a drink of water in the kitchen. And they would teach me how to get to the kitchen and, where the toaster is and microwave and yada, yada, yada. And sometimes on that depending on someone's needs, you might bring in an occupational therapist from Vision Australia or Guide Dogs. Again, no charge to the employer. And they might just do simple things like maybe put a couple of raised stickers on a microwave, just so that if I need to go in and heat my lunch up, I could just go bang, 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 sort it out by myself. So a lot of the modifications that some people might presume are involved aren't necessarily even that big. For myself, all I need is the software on my computer, which I now own, and I'm pretty sweet. So that's basically how it works, and that works the same for the bathroom or any kind of potential hazards. I've even had a orientation and mobility specialist show me the fire exit, so that in the event of an emergency, I could leave on my own free will, and I wasn't having to ask anybody, hey, where are we going? What's happening? So I knew if anything happened, I could just bolt for the door. And in one actual job that actually happened, where there was a false fire alarm, and I was able to just bolt down the fire stairs with my with my dog, no problem. So they can do all of these kinds of things. So the other one I would say, the last 2 points I guess I would make is there's something called sighted guide. Again, because oftentimes when people are in an office, and maybe it's the first time they're having a colleague that might be vision impaired or blind, and there can be a tendency to think, well, what do I do? How do I help them? Do they need their help? Should I say something? Should I say nothing? And one of the most common ways of getting around, especially in a situation where it's just easier to move quickly and you don't have time to learn where you're going, is to use a technique called sighted guide. So if you're ever out and about and you see somebody who's vision impaired or blind, and they might be holding onto someone's elbow, just above the elbow with like a finger or two, and that's just a really neat, easy way of navigating with somebody who is sighted, just to get around an area that might be particularly tricky at the time, or whatever. It doesn't really take any practice. It doesn't really take any kind of skill level. Usually the person who is blind or vision impaired will actually tell you what they need. But that's a really easy and quick way. But I guess naturally some people can think that's quite a daunting task if there's something that they've never had to do before. And I guess the last thing I wanted to mention, because I did mention it a couple of times, is guide dogs or seeing eye dogs, because some people love the idea of a dog in the office because they think that makes the day better, which it does. But other people would definitely say, oh God, an animal in the office, what's that going to be like? So from my own experience, I used to work in a office that we had 9 guide dogs on the same floor. And what I would tell you is there's a reason that those dogs are trained to be out in the public in the way they are, because if they don't meet certain thresholds of behavior, then they can't become guide dogs, because it's not just about how they guide you, it's also about how they behave when they're not guiding you. So when I got my last job, which is when I first got my dog, I would have a little bed for her under my desk, and I would wash that bed at the end of every week, bring it home, wash the bed. I'd have a little bowl of water next to that for her. I'd have a little lead, so she'd be kind of flipped in while I was under the desk. And then at lunchtime or various times throughout the day, I might just bring her for a little walk to stretch her legs, or if she needs to go to the bathroom. And again, those orientation and mobility specialists can show me maybe the closest grass area or something like that around to go and toilet her during the day. She doesn't bark, and as a rule, they're expected to behave in a certain way, because I don't want the trouble, nor does anybody who I'd be working with want the trouble. So it's a lot. I guess it's not as terrible as what it might sound like. I'm just trying to think if there's anything that I've missed. The other thing as well is, obviously when you have a guide dog, it's my duty to make sure she's groomed and clean, because again, they have to be out in the public, they have to be on trains, buses, you're going out and about, you have to make sure that you're taking care of the dog. So that also comes down to, people worry about hair and things like that. But as sometimes I say to taxi drivers, look, she's a lot cleaner than some of the people you probably have in your backseat on a Saturday night. So that's my responsibility, but that's generally how it kind of works. So yeah, look, that's really all from me, but I would be happy to take any questions about any of that if anybody has any. Thanks, Maddie.
Thank you, Conor. That was great to hear. Does anybody have any questions for Conor? Liz has a question for you, Conor.
Yep.
I'll ask a question. Hello, Conor. I really enjoyed your presentation. Gosh, you're easy to listen to.
Oh, thank you.
As a child and family services provider in regional Victoria, we're looking to do better in terms of accessible employment. We are a Diversity Council Australia employer of choice at the moment, but I'm, as the inclusion and diversity person at our organisation, looking to get more opportunities for visually impaired interns, student placements, employees in our workplace. And I just wanted to ask you, based on your lived experience, what's the biggest barrier to getting a job? And that's quite simplistic the way I've just put it, but are you able to share any of known barriers for?
Look, it's hard to put your finger on one. I would probably put it down to two things. So one is a lowering of expectations by either yourself or the community. So for example, when I did my HSC, but in my high school, I was kind of given a pass that, of course, I don't have to do work experience because why, because I'm blind, even though that's not what I thought, but that's what the school thought. So from the off, everybody else had 10 hours or 10 weeks or whatever it was worth of work experience that I didn't have. So that kind of low bar doesn't exactly set me up well to be able to feel confident in my own abilities or skills because I didn't get that chance that others may have had. And I suppose the other one is just perceptions. So perceptions of potentially employers or even, career people. There'd be amazed the amount of people out there who are helping people find jobs who will say, well, how are you going to do this? Because even they don't really know. And I suppose what we're trying to say is like, it's fine not to know, but not necessarily assuming that because you don't know means that must be X, Y, and Z. Because it's that not getting a chance. And as we all know, getting a job is about the person on the other side of the desk, what they think of you as much as what you think of you. So at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how much you love yourself and what you think you can do. If the other person on the other side doesn't agree for either good reasons or perceptions, then that's door closed. So those would probably be my best way to answer that question.
Thanks, Conor. So there's a lot of work we can do as employers in terms of perceptions and self-information and informing workplaces. And
well, yeah, and but it's not even just employers. Like obviously we are talking about employers, but it is just, as we work in the blindness sector. So what we understand better is blindness and vision impairment. So, but I mean, we don't know everything about other types of disabilities because fundamentally you don't know what you don't know. So, which is fine. That's it's just about, making that be the start of the conversation, not the end of it. So that's probably the best way I could put it.
Yeah. I'll just note that for me, whose colleague is legally blind, and I'm constantly working with him in terms of enabling him to do more in terms of capacity and flexibility and technology. But the whole system seems to be set up incorrectly in that, we have mandatory training in child protection that every employer has to do, every employee has to do, but we get, these programs and these modules that, my colleague can't access because it's either in PDF or, it's just the systems in technology seem to be set up to make, some people not achieve what they should.
Yeah. And it can be hard because, like, for example, like in my previous work, we had a system like that to go through all of those checks, and whatever system we happened to use was accessible. So, and it is hard out there because, you know, one service option is accessible and the other may not be. And if you just so happen to have that or be using that, then that might be the difference. But you know, but then at the same time, there are other ones out there, and so it is a bit slack, unfortunately, that it is a bit hit and miss. And I suppose that's a lot of that is probably down to some kind of standardization. I don't really know what the answer for that is. But yeah, it is, but definitely it is a known thing.
Thanks, Conor. I'll leave it there.
Thank you.
Brilliant question, Liz, and brilliant response, Conor. Really, really insightful and good questions. Renee also has a question.
Not actually, thanks, Maddie. Not actually a question, but just to continue on from what Conor was just saying then with respect to barriers. From the employer perspective as well, one of the things that we've had a lot of discussions about through the course of our project is the accessibility of job advertisements. So, you know, something that we have found that's quite standardized in a job advertisement, particularly in larger organizations, is, for instance, the need to have a driver's license. And what we know as employers is that for the majority of these positions, you're never going to need a driver's license. So when you're putting things like that in a job advertisement, you're putting off people that are, you know, who are blind or vision impaired, because if they believe they need a driver's license, there's no point in even applying for that position. So, you know, I think that's something that we really need to start focusing on, is the accessibility of the way we advertise for these positions. So that's really definitely something to look at. And of course, you know, the other really big barriers, like Conor was saying, is perception. So the three biggest stigmas are what we're talking about: cost, productivity, and safety. The three biggest barriers when it comes to employers looking at employing somebody who is blind or vision impaired. So that's the point of us running these sessions, is to help educate employers around those stigmas and increase the capacity for them to employ people who are blind or vision impaired, because the reality is having a vision impairment doesn't make us any less capable of doing the job, and they're the stigmas that we really need to learn on breaking down.
And Renee, what I would say as well about the driver's license one, you know, in a lot of places, if you're a rep or something like that, you're probably going to the same locations. So, you know, and I've said this in an interview to somebody who asked me if I had a driver's license. I said, no, but I can use a train and I have taxis. And I mean, somebody who needs to travel for work gets compensated for their petrol. So it would work the same way. So, you know, just because you can't get around by car, but car isn't the only form of transport available to somebody, and it isn't something that can't be learned. So that I'd also add on to that.
Thank you, Renee. Were there any other questions for Conor? I will take that as a no more questions. Thank you so much, Conor.
Thanks, Madi.